Senator Saturn, white hot with gravity. His moon, out of love for his grey steel brow, streamed away her life in a circle of tormented arms. You see them there. You see how they circle and never touch. Saturn is alone for all their circling around him. Greetings and welcome to the heart of the matter. Those lines which I just spoke out are taken from a classic play in verse by Christopher Fry called Venus Observed. And they somehow echo something that we have all experienced ever since we were children at one time or the other. The magical mystery of the stars. How often have we looked at the black night sky and seen the twinkling stars, those points of light, and wondered, what are they really like? What are the stars, the planets, the constellations, the misty Milky Way of which we are a part? What are they really like? Here, of course, in the blaze of artificial lights and in the midst of tall skyscrapers that have come up around this monument, you can't really see the stars. But go away a few miles from the city, out into the countryside, and the black night sky, studded with millions and millions of stars, like jewels, will enfold you and make you breathless with wonder. Well, one young man wondered, and wondered greatly, over 300 years ago. In fact, so great was his wonder and fascination that he delved deeply into all the astronomical texts that he could collect from all over the world and get translated. And since he was a king, and a powerful one at that, he was also able to persuade the Mughal emperor of that time, the weak and somewhat frightened Muhammad Shah, to let him build an observatory where we are right now. The Jantar Mantar, or more properly, the Yantra Mantra. Yantra, the instruments, Mantra, the formulae. This young man was Savai Jai Singh II. And he built these extraordinary structures. He built them so well that they can predict the exact positions of planetary bodies and can even measure local time correct to within a second. Jai Singh built 5 such observatories eventually. First here in Delhi, and then one in the city which he founded, Jaipur, and then 3 smaller observatories in the cities of Mathura, Ujjain, and Varanasi. Sadly, only 2 of them are in relatively good condition nowadays, the best being the one in Jaipur and this one here in Delhi. But did these observatories serve any purpose other than to satisfy a royal scholarly passion? Was the extraordinary amount of money that must have been spent on constructing them really of any use to the people of the time? Transpose that question to the present day, and we come up right against the subject, the topic that we are going to debate this evening. That India cannot afford an expensive space program. Can we, a developing country, really afford to reach out to Senator Saturn, or to Mars, or even to the moon? We have a distinguished panel of speakers here with us who will help us decide the issue, who will help us to get to the heart of the matter. The Heart of the Matter, our new monthly forum on Lok Sabha television, this is the second edition, takes the form of a classical debate. This is based on the premise that disciplined debate lies at the heart of democracy. The motion before this House is that this House believes that India cannot afford a space program. And the House consists of students from colleges of Delhi University, from Lady Shri College, from Shri College of Commerce and Bharati Vidya Bhavan. Two speakers will speak for the motion and two against, each for 5 minutes. And after all four speakers have made their initial statements, they will be given 2 minutes each for rejoinders. Thereafter, the session will be thrown open to the House for questions, each of which must be directed at a specific speaker. After the questions from the House, we will put the motion to vote and will decide whether the motion is carried or rejected. In all matters, the decision of the chair, the directions of the chair, that's myself, will be final. Speaking for the motion today, we have Arvind Kejriwal, who's very well known indeed because he's a Ramon Magsaysay Emergent Leadership Award winner. He has been instrumental in activating India's right to information movement at the grassroots and has social activities which empower the poorest citizens to fight corruption by holding the government answerable to the people. He was trained as a mechanical engineer at IIT Kharagpur and then joined the Indian Revenue Service, but then he decided to resign from the service eventually and to tackle corruption at the grassroots, and was one of the architects behind the Right to Information Act, which was passed in 2005. Welcome to the program, Arvind. Also speaking for the motion, we have Jayati Ghosh, Professor Jayati Ghosh of Jawaharlal Nehru University, a very prolific and distinguished economist with interests in globalization, international finance, employment patterns in developing countries, macroeconomic policy, and issues related to gender and development. She has held positions at Tufts University and Cambridge as well. Out of academia, she was a chairperson of the Commission on Farmers' Welfare and currently is a member of the National Knowledge Commission set up by the Prime Minister. She's also worked closely with many progressive organizations and social movements. Welcome to the program, Jayati. Speaking against the motion, we have one of the most distinguished scientists of India's space program, Dr. Kasturirangan, Member of Parliament. Dr. Kasturirangan has held so many positions that it would be impossible to enumerate them here, but principally he was Secretary, Department of Space. He was the chairman of the Indian Space Research Organization, the chairman of the Space Commission, and many other distinguished positions. And since 2003, he was been nominated as a member of the Rajya Sabha. Dr. Kasturirangan, it's a pleasure to have you with us. And also speaking against the motion, we have Abhijith Gupta, who is currently principal advisor to the he's principal advisor of the Planning Commission, but currently working in the Administrative Reforms Commission. But he's here principally because he spent 5 years working in the Department of Space and is intimately acquainted with India's space program and its complexities. That is our panel. But before we begin the actual debate, let's take a look at a film which shows us some of the issues that are involved, the issues concerning the benefits of the space program and also the expenses involved.
In the words of the President Dr. APJ Kalam, many individuals with myopic visions question the relevance of space activities in a newly independent nation, which was finding it difficult to feed its population. The vision of the scientists was clear. If Indians have to play any meaningful role in the Committee of Nations, they must be second to none in the application of advanced technologies to their real-life problem. They had no intention of using this as a means to display India's might. After gaining independence in 1947, the country focused all its energies in nation building and bolstering economic and industrial development, fully understanding the key role of science and technology. Indian rocketry was adopted with the technological vision of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Dr. Vikram Sarabhai took up the challenge of realizing this dream and gave shape to modern Indian rocketry and space endeavors. The origins of India's space program date back more than 4 decades when the Indian government established the Indian National Committee for Space Research in 1962 to conduct sounding rocket research. The Indian National Committee for Space Research was rechristened in the late 60s as the Indian Space Research Organization. ISRO launched its first satellite, Aryabhat, in 1975 on a Soviet rocket. India's first indigenously built orbital launch vehicle, SLV-3, put satellite in orbit in 1980. First operational launch of Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle in September 1997. India's space program has passed through 2 stages of development. A 20-year initial stage devoted to acquiring basic infrastructure and experimenting with low-capability systems, and a second stage of 10 years devoted to building and flight testing higher capability systems. Expectedly, these stages have resulted in some very valid lessons, many because of failures that occurred during the experiments. Many failures in space technology are caused by human error, poor workmanship, faulty judgment, and incorrect launch management decisions. Some failures are the result of defective parts. Failure can occur in any phase of launch vehicle development. Difficulties noted in inadequate designs and component tests. Improper handling in manufacturing and repair processes. Insufficient pre-launch checks, although it has been accepted that failures could have been prevented through rigorous reliability enhancement measures. There is little doubt that the successful boost given to its space capabilities has given the country an edge that has helped it to emerge as a major global space power. This has expectedly resulted in space programs in collaboration with other countries, including developed nations. However, the dilemma of whether India can afford space programs in a scenario of more basic problems facing the country at the grassroots level has always remained a moot question. Shalini Verma for Lok Sabha TV.
And so it's time to begin to get to the heart of the matter. The first speaker for the motion, can India afford an expensive space program? Or rather, the motion being that the House believes that India cannot afford an expensive space program. The first speaker is Arvind Kejriwal. Arvind, your 5 minutes begin now.
I think it will be wrong to paint me as a person who would say that paint me as a person for the motion or against the motion, because this is a very grey area, and it is an interesting subject to discuss whether India can afford such an expensive space program, because we are a country with very limited resources, human resources and financial resources, and we have huge problems. A large population of a country is poor, it is illiterate, and we need resources to tackle that. Therefore, we do need space program, because space program is, I mean, it tackles broadcasting, it takes care of weather forecast, it takes care of geological survey, and there are so many things, and that really impacts and it affects the lives of the common people also. But at the same time, if we carry any space programs which are there to satiate our desire to become the first country or the second country or the third country in the world to have such a huge space program, or to be the second country to reach moon or whatever, I mean, if we get into that kind of a competition, I think then we need to rethink any such program which we do that. So in my opinion, first of all, we are told, I mean, I read something that we are carrying out some kind of a manned mission to moon, which is going to cost us about 50,000 crore rupees or something like that. Now, I think the country needs to debate that. I think the country needs to figure out whether it will be worthwhile sending a person to the moon, what will be the benefits that will flow out of it, whether those benefits are commensurate to the expenses that we are making, or can we put our scientific resources to do something else which will benefit the people more than. So I think it's not a black and white thing to say that India cannot and should not carry on with its space programs, but I think the debate is that every such program that we carry out should be completely transparent, it should be properly debated, and it should be through some kind of a consensus that the entire nation gets into. These are my initial comments on this.
Right. Thank you very much, Arvind. You were well within your time. Let's now go to the first speaker against the motion. Dr. Kasturirangan, you have 5 minutes beginning now.
Well, you know, October 2nd, 1957, the launch of Sputnik happened. The world saw in it an extension of the Cold War between the United States and the then Soviet Union. But here was a visionary in this country, Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, who saw in the vantage point of space a very unique resource to address the developmental issues of this country. The questions related to communications, you know, in 60s, with the communication, it took 2 weeks for a telegram to reach from the northeast to Delhi. And then there are the questions of healthcare, questions of education, questions of timely and accurate information about our natural resources. He saw that this is a very unique resource to address these questions which are unique to India as problems related to development. So it is in this context he went to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, made this suggestion, and here was another visionary who had no benchmark about what this system can do at that particular point in time. He knew the investments are going to be fairly large compared to other areas, and at the same time whether there will be questions of whether there will be a spin-off, whether something will accrue out of it, it was not very clear, but he still gave a decision, go ahead. But then we were very cautious, and then onwards we went through 3 phases. The first phase was to test it out with foreign systems. How much are they applicable to this country, whether it is in communication, the famous sociological experiment that was conducted, the satellite instructional television experiment is an example. We used foreign satellite to look at our resources, and these kind of things give us a benchmark as to what this country needs in the development, which the normal conventional systems cannot do. That's very important to note. These are not the systems which can be supplemented by the ground systems in a cheaper fashion. So that was one thing that was established, and we spent something like 1% of our present level budget for that entire 7 to 8 year period when we evaluated this system. Then came the second phase, we call it experimental. We wanted to wet our hands. We did it on an end-to-end basis, built Bhaskara satellite, Apple satellite, but they were all experimental satellite, limited budget, short turnaround time, evaluate the efficacy of those systems with respect to India, create a nucleus of capability for this. So that became the second phase. Currently we are in the third phase, where these systems provide services on the regular basis. What is the services? The communication, Arvind mentioned about it. Remote sensing, where you get your natural resources. India has a very unique remote sensing system, and more important than the space system, we have a user community which is spread over government agencies, private agencies, as well as non-governmental agencies. All use this system for development, like in water, forestry inventory, environment, geology, oceanography. There is a whole host of things on which these systems are used. And then of course you have the ability to put them into the orbit, and so we had to develop, because simply these can get us into trouble whenever the geopolitical equations change. So we have to be, so once you have a system like this, we have to be self-reliant, so we had to build our own rockets. All told, we have spent $7 billion since for the last 40 years. When I say $7 billion over 40 years, it is equal to 50% of NASA's annual budget. So that gives you a feel of what we have spent so far, and therefore that's one of the reasons why one of the magazines in the United States said India's space program on shoestring budget. Current budget is about $600 to $700 million per year. This is again compared to, if you want to look at NASA, of course it is 16 billion. You got Japan which is 2 billion, Europe 3 billion. So if you look at even those kind of a thing, we are nowhere near the scale in which they do, or the level of money they spend. But certainly,
1 minute to go.
Right. So, but certainly we have done what the country is expected us to do, which is related to providing unique solutions to the problems of development in many of these particular areas. And that's where the strength of the space system is. Ultimately, it is also a strategic capability. This kind of a capability nobody shares with you. You know what India has gone through in the nuclear deal, but this can be much worse when you are really when you need this kind of a capability, which is much more beyond the civilian domain. So these are the kind of consideration that forced us to take up the space program. And I should say India is foremost, not so much because of prestige, but more so because of the fact that we have a system which is tuned to our country's need. I can only conclude this by saying it is not the question of at this stage whether we can afford to have space, but the question is whether we can afford to ignore it. This is what Dr. Sarabhai said 40 years back, and I think in retrospect he seems to really a visionary whose opinion on this, there is no doubt it is correct.
Your time is up now.
Thank
In fact,
you.
I'll let you go a little over it. Dr. Kasturirangan, thank you very much for eloquently defending the space program and for showing us the benefits against the extremely low costs. Well, thank you very much. Now, the second speaker for the motion, that is to debate that India doesn't need an expensive space program, cannot afford an expensive space program, I turn to Professor Jayati Ghosh. Your time starts now, 5 minutes, and I'll give you a warning when you have 1 minute left.
Thank you, Sunit. No, I think, there's no debate about whether we should have a space program. I mean, obviously we should, and clearly we've had a very cost-effective and a good space program so far, which has delivered many things that Dr. Kasturirangan spoke about. I think the issue is how much more ambitious do we want to be? I think that's really the debate. How much more do we want to step beyond the kinds of things we have been focusing on, which are much more development related, which are much more, as he said, specifically devoted to finding the needs of our people, and go into areas which are actually, if you like, exploratory even at an international level, at a global level. Do we want to get into going to the moon, to Mars, to some other solar system? Do we want to get into shall I say, the frontiers of space exploration and go into that level of expenditure? I think Dr. Kasturirangan put it very well, that we are doing amazing things with the very low expenditure we have at the moment relative to other countries. It's still a lot relative to our own GDP. But do we want to actually push that up by a level of, say, 5 or 10? Do we want to get into a range where we are doing, let's say, the kind of things China has declared that it's going to do? In terms of sending a mission to the moon, they also want to send one in 2008. I understand we also want to send one in 2008. And if so, then is it changing the nature of this program? I think, as I said, there's no debate that we want something that certainly we want a lot more spending in areas and exploration in areas that will benefit the people of India. Do we want to get into a competitive macho thing about being the first somewhere here or there? Do we want to get into warfare at another level? Dr. Kasturirangan mentioned about strategic purposes. Do we want to see this as yet another arena for warfare, a sort of nationalist desire? If not, then why does India have to do it on its own? Why can't we have a consortium of developing countries, all of whom are trying to do this kind of thing together? Why do we have to see it as us in India doing a separate one, some other country doing another one, and we all spend our separate bits of money to try and grab the same pot of resources internationally?
Right. Jyoti, thank you very much. You stayed within your time and you made an interesting suggestion. Why don't we collaborate? As for instance, the Europeans are collaborating in the space program, and that's a good suggestion perhaps which could be taken up further. But now it's time to turn to our last speaker against the motion. May I turn to Mr. Abhijith Gupta to defend the space program.
Thank you, Sunit. Let me try and broaden the subject a little bit, but after having pointed out that I understand there are some 50 countries in the world who have some sort of a space program, from the US down to some of the smaller developing countries. That doesn't necessarily mean that we should have an expensive space program, and as I think the general consensus is not that expensive. I want to broaden it out into 3 or 4 ways of looking at the issue. One is that India's program has traditionally, from the time of Dr. Sarabhai, very consciously been a program which is inward, earth inward looking. It is the use of Earth's resources, and in particular India's own resources. It is not as much of a galactic exploratory program as it has been. In terms of a broad funding of the program, of the space program, it's been, say, 2/3 into Earth observation, let us say, and just about 1/3 into launch vehicle. And the launch vehicle also has been very largely as an adjunct to our own Earth observation program. And I think Dr. Kasturirangan, the best person to speak about on this, has already pointed out that there is a wide range of activities which are social and economic activities which have become possible in India through our space program, whether it's distance education, oceanography, meteorology, telecommunications, radio, telemedicine. There's a whole range of issues. And frankly, some of the expenditure that the Department of Space incurs can, in a sense, in an economic analysis, should actually be put on those other departments, in a sense. And which is not, it's not that they don't put in their expenditure, but the direct expenditure that is shown under the Department of Space could well be spread out. Having said that, there are two other points I'd like to make. One is the question of the people who do that space program. There are about 16,000 people in the Department of Space, of whom 11,000 are technical people, and of whom again 7,000 are the upper echelons of the scientific community. They work at probably 1/8 or 1/10 of the cost that you would have in the US. There is something to keeping that scientific spirit alive, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting in this wonderful environment here. And the last point I want to make, which takes off from the point that Arvind and Dr. Ghosh made, this is of, are we trying to grab at the moon or grab a bit of pie in the sky sort of a thing. There is I mean, you have these international treaties, and you have the Moon Treaty, which I understand, and I'm not an expert in this lesson, but I understand a number of countries haven't signed it. It's the same with the Antarctica. Everybody wants to be there. If the entire world, using the entire Earth could together go out to the moon and to the stars, that would be ideal. But I think the way this Earth is divided into countries, unfortunately, we may have to continue to focus a little bit in that direction. I thought I'd just make these points.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Sen Gupta. Well, there you have it. Those were the initial statements of our four distinguished speakers trying to get to the heart of the matter. Does India need an expensive space program? We're going to take a short break, and after that we'll be back with rejoinders. Stay with us. Welcome back to the heart of the matter. We have had our four distinguished speakers speaking for and against the motion. Their initial statements are over. It's time now for rejoinders. Each speaker will get 2 minutes to make rejoinders against any other argument that they may have come across in the course of this debate, as well as to make any additional points that they might wish to on their side of the fence. So, first of all, let me turn to Arvind Kejriwal. You have 2 minutes now for your rejoinder.
I think there's just one issue that I would like to make, and maybe I'll be very grateful if Dr. Kasturirangan could throw some light, is that a huge chunk of the space program is not about defense, it's not about security, it's